The thing about being called boring is that people stop watching you. They assume they know exactly what you're capable of, which is apparently organizing spreadsheets and remembering to pay the electric bill on time. What they don't realize is that boring people notice everything. We catalog every slight, every dismissive laugh, every eye roll when we walk into a room. My name is Quentin Frost, I'm 33, and I'm a software architect. I build systems that work flawlessly in the background while everyone else takes credit for the magic happening on their screens. It's a fitting metaphor for my marriage, really. Tonight, Nina was throwing another one of her dinner parties. Our house buzzed with the artificial energy of social media influencers and wannabe lifestyle gurus. Everyone held their phones like security blankets, documenting every bite of overpriced cheese and every carefully curated conversation. "Quentin, honey, can you grab more wine from the basement?" Nina called out, not bothering to look in my direction. She was too busy posing with her friend Gina for what had to be the 15th selfie of the evening. I descended into what Nina called my man cave, a basement office where I actually got work done while she played house upstairs. The wine rack sat in the corner, stocked with bottles that cost more than most people's weekly groceries. Nina insisted on the expensive stuff for her image, though I doubted any of her friends could tell the difference between a $50 Pinot and grape juice. When I returned upstairs, the conversation had shifted to relationships. This was dangerous territory. Nina's friends, Gina, Lexi, and Sam, loved dissecting marriages like they were reality TV shows. "I mean, stability is nice and all," Nina was saying, gesturing with her wine glass. "But sometimes you need a little excitement, you know?" Lexi nodded eagerly. "Totally. Like, remember when you were with Julian? That guy was intense." My jaw tightened. Julian Blake, the ex-boyfriend who somehow managed to insert himself into every conversation about our relationship. Personal trainer, amateur philosopher, and professional attention seeker. Nina had dated him for 2 years before we met, and apparently those had been the most thrilling 24 months of her existence. "Oh my God, Julian," Sam chimed in, already pulling out her phone to record. "Didn't he take you skydiving on your second date?" "And rock climbing," Nina added, her eyes lighting up in a way they never did when she talked about our quiet dinners or weekend Netflix binges. He was so spontaneous, like we'd be having coffee and suddenly we'd be driving to Vermont for a hiking weekend. I set the wine bottles on the counter with perhaps more force than necessary. "Sounds exhausting," I muttered. "What was that, babe?" Nina asked, though her tone suggested she'd heard me perfectly well. "Nothing. Just thinking about how expensive all that spontaneity must have been." Gina laughed. "Oh, Quentin, always the practical one." The conversation continued, but I found myself studying the group dynamics. Nina held court in the center, basking in the attention as she regaled them with stories of Julian's various adventures. Her friends hung on every word, occasionally glancing at me with what I could only describe as pity. I'd seen this pattern before. Nina would start with innocent reminiscing, then gradually escalate until she was practically eulogizing her past relationship while I stood there like a museum exhibit labeled "What She Settled For." "You know what Julian used to say?" Nina continued, her voice getting louder as the wine took effect. "He said life is too short to play it safe. You have to grab excitement with both hands." "Sounds like a motivational poster," I said dryly. "At least it's not a spreadsheet," Lexi shot back, and the group erupted in laughter. I felt something cold settle in my chest. These weren't just casual jokes anymore. This was a coordinated effort to diminish me in my own home, with my own wife leading the charge. Nina was really hitting her stride now. I swear sometimes I think about what my life would be like if I'd made different choices. Like, what if I'd stayed with someone who actually knew how to have fun? "Nina," I said quietly, but she was on a roll. "I mean, don't get me wrong, security is nice, but there's something to be said for passion, you know? For someone who makes your heart race instead of just existing." The room fell silent except for the soft buzz of Sam's phone recording. Nina looked around at her audience, clearly enjoying the attention, the drama she was creating. "Honestly," she said, raising her wine glass like she was making a toast, "if I had to choose between Quentin and Julian right now, I'd probably pick Julian. At least with him, I'd never be bored." Her friends laughed, not polite, uncomfortable laughter, but genuine amusement at my expense. Gina actually clapped. Sam kept recording. Lexi looked at me with undisguised satisfaction. I felt something shift inside me, like tumblers falling into place in a lock. The background hum of conversation faded, and I could hear my own heartbeat with crystal clarity. Nina was still giggling, still basking in the approval of her audience, completely unaware that she'd just crossed a line we couldn't uncross. I set down my wine glass and looked directly at her. "You can go back to him," I said, my voice carrying through the sudden quiet. "You just don't know what's waiting for you there." The laughter faded instantly. Nina's face went pale, her wine glass frozen halfway to her lips. Her friends exchanged glances, suddenly uncomfortable with the shift in atmosphere. "Quentin, I was just," she started. "Joking," I finished. "I know. But here's the thing about jokes, Nina. The best ones have a punchline that catches everyone by surprise." I walked to the kitchen counter and picked up our shared tablet, the one we used for shopping lists and shared calendars, the one Nina thought I never checked, the one where her group chat notifications had been pinging all evening. "Speaking of surprises," I continued, scrolling through her messages, "it looks like you and your friends have been planning quite the reunion. Tomorrow at Chez Laurent, wasn't it? Table for two?" Nina's wine glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the hardwood floor. Red wine spread across the white oak. "How did you?" she whispered. "I'm a software architect, remember? I notice when people leave digital breadcrumbs." I looked around the room at her friends who were suddenly very interested in their phones. "Funny how everyone's so quiet now." Gina cleared her throat. "Maybe we should go." "No, stay," I said, my voice pleasant but carrying an edge that made everyone freeze. "This is just getting interesting. Nina was just telling us about her choice, weren't you, honey?" Nina stared at me like she was seeing a stranger. Maybe she was. I'd spent 3 years being the reliable, predictable husband she could count on to pay the bills and stay out of her way. But reliable doesn't mean weak, and predictable doesn't mean stupid. "I think," I said, setting the tablet back on the counter, "it's time everyone learned the difference." The party ended quickly after that. Nina's friends gathered their purses and phones, mumbling excuses about early mornings and prior commitments. Sam stopped recording. Gina avoided eye contact. Lexi looked like she wanted to say something but thought better of it. Within 15 minutes, Nina and I were alone in our house, surrounded by the debris of her perfect evening. Wine stains on the floor, half-empty glasses abandoned on every surface, the lingering smell of expensive perfume and cheap drama. "Quentin," Nina said finally, her voice smaller than I'd heard it in months. "I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did." I started collecting glasses, moving through the room with mechanical precision. "You meant every word. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" She watched me clean up her mess, probably waiting for me to apologize, to smooth things over like I always did, to be the boring, reliable husband who absorbed her cruelty and asked for more. Instead, I pulled out my phone and started making calls. "Who are you calling?" she asked. "Just handling some logistics," I said, walking toward the basement stairs. "You might want to get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a big day for you." I spent the night in my office, but I wasn't sleeping. I was planning. 3 years of marriage had taught me everything I needed to know about Nina's weaknesses, her fears, her carefully constructed image. She thought she knew me, thought she could predict my every move. She was about to learn how wrong she was. At 3 in the morning, while Nina slept off her wine and her performance upstairs, I sat in my basement office orchestrating the most complex system I'd ever designed. Not software this time, but something far more elegant. Consequences. The first call went to my friend Marcus at the car dealership where he worked as a manager. We'd known each other since college, and he was one of the few people who'd seen through Nina's act from the beginning. "Quentin? Jesus, man, it's 3 a.m. Everything okay?" "I need a favor," I said, keeping my voice low. "And I need it fast." Marcus had connections throughout the city: real estate, hospitality, entertainment. Within an hour, he'd helped me secure a furnished apartment in the downtown district, complete with a 6-month lease paid in advance. Cash transaction, no paperwork trail leading back to our joint accounts. The second call was trickier. I'd found Julian's current fiancée through social media. Elise Morrison, 29, worked in marketing for a pharmaceutical company. Her Instagram was full of couple photos with Julian, vacation shots, and pictures of an engagement ring that probably cost more than my car. I crafted my message carefully. "Ms. Morrison, you don't know me, but I think you should know what your fiancé has been planning behind your back. I have screenshots of conversations between him and my wife. They're planning to meet tomorrow at Chez Laurent at 7 p.m. I'm not looking for anything from you, just thought you deserved to know the truth." I attached the screenshots from Nina's group chat, the messages where she and her friends had been coordinating her reunion with Julian. Nothing explicit, nothing that could be traced back to me accessing her accounts, just enough to paint a clear picture of what was happening. Elise responded within 20 minutes. "Thank you for telling me. I'll handle this." The third piece required more creativity. Our apartment lease was in both our names, but I'd been handling all the paperwork and payments for 3 years. A few strategic calls to the property management company, some creative interpretation of the subletting clause, and suddenly we had new tenants moving in. The Broken Strings were a local indie band known for their late-night practice sessions and their complete disregard for noise ordinances. They needed a place to crash for a few months while they recorded their album. Our apartment, with its thin walls and uptight neighbors, would be perfect. "You sure about this, man?" Marcus asked when I explained the plan. "This is pretty nuclear." "She made her choice," I said, watching the sun rise through my basement window. "I'm just making sure she gets to live with it." By 6 a.m., I had everything in place. My belongings were packed in boxes, ready to be moved to my new apartment. My bank accounts were secured, passwords changed, direct deposits redirected. I'd even transferred the utilities into Nina's name. She'd always wanted more control over the household finances. The beautiful thing about being the boring one in a relationship is that you handle all the mundane details. Nina had no idea how our lease worked, what our monthly expenses were, or how to contact our landlord. She'd been content to let me manage the adult responsibilities while she focused on her image. Now those responsibilities were about to become her problem. I heard movement upstairs around 7, Nina getting ready for her day job at a social media marketing firm. She worked with lifestyle brands, helping them craft authentic online presences. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Morning?" she called down the stairs, her voice carefully neutral. She was probably hoping last night had been a wine-fueled aberration, something we could laugh off over coffee. "Morning," I called back, not moving from my desk. "I made coffee if you want some." "I'm good, thanks." A pause. Then footsteps on the stairs. Nina appeared in my office doorway wearing her favorite work outfit, a designer blazer that cost more than most people's rent, paired with jeans that had been strategically distressed by someone making minimum wage. "About last night," she began. "What about it?" "I think maybe we should talk." I looked up from my laptop where I'd been monitoring the situation. Elise had been busy on social media, posting cryptic messages about fake people and learning the truth. Julian had been trying to call Nina since 5 a.m., but I'd taken the liberty of blocking his number from our home phone. "Talk about what?" I asked. Nina fidgeted with her coffee cup. "You know what? The things I said, the way I I was drunk, Quentin. People say stupid things when they're drunk. Do they? Or do they just say things they're normally too polite to admit? That's not fair. Neither is spending 3 years married to someone who thinks you're a consolation prize. She flinched. I don't think that. Your friends do. And you let them. Hell, you encouraged them. I closed my laptop and gave her my full attention. Tell me something, Nina. When you look at me, what do you see? I see my husband. Try again. She was quiet for a long moment, probably trying to figure out what I wanted to hear. That was Nina's problem. She'd spent so long crafting responses for social media that she'd forgotten how to have an authentic conversation. I see someone who loves me, she said finally. Past tense, I corrected. You see someone who loved you, someone who built his life around making you happy, who worked extra hours to pay for your expensive taste, who sat quietly while you and your friends treated him like a joke. Quentin, I'm not finished. I stood up, and something in my posture made her take a step back. You want to know what I see when I look at you? I see someone who's about to learn the difference between stability and weakness. Her phone buzzed, then again, and again. You might want to check that, I said. Sounds important. Nina glanced at her phone and frowned. Julian's been calling all morning, that's weird. Is it? Maybe he's excited about your date tonight. The color drained from her face. How do you know about that? Same way I know about everything else you thought you were hiding. The question is, are you still planning to go? She stared at me, probably trying to calculate how much trouble she was in, how much damage control she'd need to do. But Nina had never been good at math. That wasn't... We were just going to talk. I'm sure you were. Should be an interesting conversation, especially with Elise there. Elise? Julian's fiancée. You remember her, right? The one whose engagement ring you've been liking on Instagram while planning to steal her boyfriend? Nina's phone started ringing. Julian's name flashed on the screen. Answer it, I said. I'm curious what excuse he's going to use. She declined the call, but it immediately started ringing again. He seems persistent, I observed, almost like he's panicking about something. The third time she declined, Julian sent a text message. Nina read it, and her face went white. What's wrong? I asked, though I had a pretty good idea. He says Elise knows. He says someone sent her screenshots of our messages. Huh? That's unfortunate. I wonder who would do such a thing. Nina looked at me with dawning horror. You didn't. I did what any concerned citizen would do. I made sure someone wasn't being deceived by the people they trusted most. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a group text from her friends, probably trying to figure out what was happening. Nina's carefully orchestrated drama was spinning out of control, and she was realizing that she wasn't the director anymore. This is insane, she said. You can't destroy my life because of one stupid comment. I'm not destroying anything, I said, walking past her toward the stairs. I'm just letting you live with your choices. Isn't that what you wanted? Freedom to be with someone more exciting? I climbed the stairs, leaving her standing in my office with her phone buzzing like an angry wasp. I had work to do, and Nina had a date to get ready for. By noon, the Broken Strings had moved their equipment into our living room. By 2 p.m., Nina's credit cards had been declined at her favorite lunch spot. I'd transferred my contribution to our joint account into a separate savings account she didn't have access to. By 4 p.m., she was calling me in tears, but I'd already changed my number. The last text I sent from my old phone was simple. Julian's fiancée is waiting for you at your reunion spot. Enjoy your choice. Then I drove to my new apartment, poured myself a drink, and waited for the show to begin. Chez Laurent was the kind of restaurant that Nina loved. Overpriced, overdesigned, and full of people taking pictures of their food. It was also the perfect venue for a public humiliation, which was exactly what I was counting on. I'd positioned myself at the bar across the street, with a clear view of the restaurant's floor-to-ceiling windows. At 6:45 p.m., Nina arrived in her car, checking her makeup in the rearview mirror one last time. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, a red dress that hugged her curves, designer heels that added 3 inches to her height, and jewelry that caught the light just right. She looked like she was going to seduce someone, not have a casual conversation with an ex-boyfriend. Julian arrived 5 minutes later, and I had to admit he looked the part. Tall, athletic, with the kind of casual confidence that came from never having to worry about consequences. He wore a fitted shirt that showed off his gym-sculpted physique and jeans that probably cost more than most people's car payments. They met at the hostess station with an embrace that lasted just a little too long for former lovers who were just talking. Nina laughed at something Julian said, throwing her head back in that practiced gesture she used when she wanted to show off her neck. The hostess led them to a corner table, intimate and dimly lit. Perfect for a romantic reconciliation, terrible for what was about to happen. I ordered another drink and settled in to watch. For the first 20 minutes, everything went according to Nina's plan. She and Julian leaned across the table toward each other, their conversation animated and flirtatious. Nina touched his hand when she laughed. Julian reached over to brush an imaginary speck from her shoulder. They looked like a couple falling in love, not two people betraying their respective partners. Then Elise Morrison walked into the restaurant. I'd seen her photos online, but they didn't capture the full impact of her presence. Elise was beautiful in a completely different way than Nina. Polished where Nina was flashy, elegant where Nina was obvious. She wore a simple black dress and minimal jewelry, but she commanded attention the moment she stepped through the door. She scanned the restaurant like a predator looking for prey, and when her eyes found Julian's table, her smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Nina noticed Julian's expression change first. He'd gone pale, his hand frozen halfway to his wine glass. Nina followed his gaze and turned in her seat just as Elise reached their table. "Well," Elise said, her voice carrying clearly across the restaurant. "Isn't this cozy?" Julian stood up so quickly he knocked over his chair. "Elise, I can explain." "Oh, I'm sure you can. You always were creative with your explanations." Elise turned to Nina, who was still sitting frozen in her chair. "You must be Nina. I've heard so much about you. Well, I've read so much about you anyway." Nina finally found her voice. "I'm sorry, who are you?" "I'm Julian's fiancée, or I was, until about 3 hours ago, when I found out about your little reunion plan." The restaurant was starting to take notice. Conversations at nearby tables had quieted, and I could see phones being discreetly pulled out to record the drama unfolding in the corner. "This isn't what it looks like," Nina said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Really? Because it looks like my fiancé is having a romantic dinner with his ex-girlfriend while I'm at home planning our wedding." Elise picked up Julian's wine glass and examined it like she was checking for poison. "Tell me, Nina, what exactly did you think was going to happen here?" Julian tried to step between them. "Elise, please, let's discuss this privately." "Privately?" Elise laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Like you discussed your feelings for Nina privately? Like you privately planned this dinner behind my back?" She turned back to Nina, who was looking around desperately for an escape route. "I have to admit, I'm curious. What did you think Julian was going to do? Leave me for you? Did you really think he'd give up the life we've built together for someone who's already married to someone else?" "We're getting divorced," Nina said quickly, and I nearly choked on my drink. That was news to me. "Are you? How interesting. Does your husband know that?" Nina's face flushed red. "Our marriage is complicated." "I bet it is, especially now that he knows about your extracurricular activities." Elise set down the wine glass and pulled out her phone. "You know, I took the liberty of doing some research on you after I got those interesting screenshots this morning. You have quite the social media presence. Very aspirational." She showed Nina the phone screen, and I could see Nina's face go white even from across the street. "What's wrong?" Julian asked, but Elise ignored him. It's amazing what you can find out about someone online, Elise continued. Their job, their friends, their habits. Did you know your employer has a very strict social media policy? Something about not bringing negative attention to the company brand? You didn't, Nina whispered. Oh, I did. I sent them a very detailed email about one of their employees' extracurricular activities. With screenshots, of course. I'm sure they'll want to discuss it with you first thing Monday morning. The conversation was getting heated, and other diners were openly staring now. The manager appeared at the edge of the dining room, clearly trying to decide whether to intervene. Julian finally found his voice. Elise, that's enough. You've made your point. Have I? She turned on him with sudden fury. Have I really? Because I don't think you understand what you've lost yet. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small velvet box, the engagement ring Julian had given her. She set it on the table between them like she was playing a trump card. 6 months of planning, she said, her voice getting louder. 6 months of choosing flowers and venues and caterers. 6 months of believing that you actually wanted to marry me. I do want to marry you, Julian said desperately. No, you want to marry my trust fund. There's a difference. She looked around the restaurant, making sure she had everyone's attention. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce you to Julian Blake, personal trainer and professional gold digger. He's been engaged to me for 6 months while secretly planning to reunite with his ex-girlfriend. Someone in the back of the restaurant actually applauded. Nina looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. And this, Elise continued, gesturing toward Nina, is Nina Frost, social media manager and part-time homewrecker. She's married, but apparently that's just a minor detail. Nina finally snapped. You don't know anything about my marriage. I know your husband is the one who sent me those screenshots. I know he's the one who told me about this dinner. And I know he's probably watching this whole thing right now, enjoying every minute of it. Nina's head whipped around, scanning the restaurant windows. For a moment her eyes met mine across the street, and I raised my glass in a small salute. There he is, Elise said, following Nina's gaze. Your boring, predictable husband, the one you were so eager to trade in for this piece of work. She gestured toward Julian, who was trying to make himself invisible in his chair. Well, congratulations. You can have him, but you might want to find somewhere else to celebrate, because I just canceled his credit cards. Julian's face went ashen. You can't do that. I can, actually. Funny thing about joint accounts, they require joint agreement to maintain. And I no longer agree to support your lifestyle. She picked up her engagement ring and dropped it into her wine glass, where it sank to the bottom with a small splash. Enjoy your reunion, she said, and walked out of the restaurant with her head held high. The silence that followed was deafening. Nina and Julian sat at their ruined table, surrounded by staring diners and the wreckage of their grand romantic gesture. Julian's phone was buzzing constantly, probably his credit card companies calling to inform him that his accounts had been frozen. Nina looked like she was going to cry. Julian looked like he was going to throw up. And I felt better than I had in months. I paid my tab and walked back to my car, leaving them to figure out how to pay for their expensive dinner with frozen credit cards and shattered dreams. As I drove home to my new apartment, I couldn't help but smile. The night was just getting started. My new apartment was a revelation. Clean lines, modern furniture, and blessed silence. No more listening to Nina's friends dissect every celebrity breakup. No more pretending to care about influencer drama. Just me, a bottle of good whiskey, and the satisfaction of a plan executed flawlessly. I was 3 drinks in when my old phone started buzzing. I'd kept it active just to monitor the fallout, and Nina had been calling every 10 minutes since she'd spotted me at the bar. I let it go to voicemail, preferring to savor her desperation in recorded form rather than real time. The first message was pure panic. Quentin, what the hell is happening? That woman, Julian's fiancée, she knows everything. She said you told her. Call me back right now. The second was anger. I know you're there, Quentin. This is insane. You can't just destroy my life because of one stupid comment at a party. By the fifth message, she was crying. Please, Quentin. I know I screwed up, but this is too much. She contacted my job. She ruined everything. Just call me back so we can fix this. The sixth message was different. Nina's voice was smaller, more confused. I went home, and there are people in our apartment. They have guitars, and they said you gave them permission to be there. What's going on? Where are you? I poured myself another drink and checked social media. The restaurant scene had already made it online, courtesy of several diners who'd recorded the confrontation. Sure, Cheating Couple was trending locally, and Nina's carefully curated Instagram was being flooded with comments from strangers who'd seen the videos. My phone rang again. This time it was Marcus. Jesus Christ, man, he said when I answered. I just saw the videos. That was brutal. That was justice. The band texted me. They said Nina showed up at the apartment screaming about squatters. They had to show her the subletting agreement you signed. Good. Let her see how the adult world works when you're not married to someone who handles everything for you. She's been calling me too, trying to get your new address. I didn't give it to her, but she's pretty desperate. She'll figure it out eventually, but by then it won't matter. Marcus was quiet for a moment. You know there's no going back from this, right? Even if you wanted to. I don't want to. That's the point. After I hung up, I opened my laptop and did some research. Julian's fitness studio had a website with client testimonials and class schedules. His social media was full of motivational quotes and shirtless selfies. He'd built his brand around being the perfect boyfriend, the guy who could help you transform your life through fitness and positive thinking. That brand was about to take a serious hit. I created a few anonymous accounts and started sharing the restaurant videos in fitness forums and local Facebook groups. Is this the kind of person you want as your trainer? I asked. Someone who cheats on his fiancée and helps married women cheat on their husbands? The response was immediate and brutal. Julian's Instagram comment section became a wasteland of criticism and canceled appointments. His fitness studio's Yelp page was flooded with one-star reviews from people who'd never even been there. By midnight, Nina had left 12 voicemails and sent 37 text messages. The progression was fascinating to watch. Panic, anger, bargaining, depression, and back to anger again. She was cycling through the stages of grief for her old life, the one where she could treat people like disposable accessories without consequences. The last message she sent was a photo. Nina standing in the hallway outside our old apartment, surrounded by boxes of her belongings. The broken strings had apparently decided her stuff was taking up too much space in their new rehearsal room. I hope you're happy, the text read. I'm homeless because of you. I was happy, actually. Happier than I'd been in years. The next morning brought fresh entertainment. Nina had apparently spent the night in her car, and her social media posts were becoming increasingly unhinged. She'd gone from carefully curated lifestyle content to rambling screeds about betrayal and revenge. Her follower count was dropping by the hundreds as people distanced themselves from the drama. The brands she worked with were quietly removing her from their campaigns. Her perfectly constructed online persona was collapsing in real time. Julian wasn't faring much better. Without Elise's financial support, he couldn't afford his downtown loft. His fitness clients were abandoning him in droves. He'd posted a long, rambling apology video that only made things worse, coming across as whiny and self-serving rather than genuinely remorseful. But the real masterpiece came Monday morning, when Nina's employer called an emergency meeting. I didn't witness this personally, but Nina's friend Gina was apparently present and shared the details in a group chat that Nina had forgotten to remove me from. Nina was fired on the spot, not just for the negative publicity, but for violating the company's social media policy and bringing disrepute to their brand. The irony was perfect. Nina, who'd made a career out of managing other people's online images, had destroyed her own so thoroughly that she'd become unemployable in her chosen field. By Tuesday, she was staying with Gina, sleeping on a couch and borrowing clothes because most of her wardrobe was still in boxes in the hallway of our old apartment building. The broken strings had changed the locks and were refusing to let her retrieve her belongings until she paid them for storage fees. Julian had moved back in with his parents, a humiliation that his social media followers were enjoying immensely. His motivational posts about overcoming obstacles and staying strong were being mocked mercilessly by people who'd seen him cry in a restaurant while his fiancée destroyed his credit rating. On Wednesday, I got a call from an unknown number. "Is this Quentin Frost?" "Who's asking?" "This is Elise Morrison. I think we should meet." We arranged to meet at a coffee shop downtown, far from Nina's usual haunts. Elise arrived exactly on time, looking composed and professional, despite having her life turned upside down less than a week ago. "I wanted to thank you," she said, settling into the chair across from me. "And I wanted to apologize." "For what?" "For what Julian put you through. I had no idea he was still hung up on his ex. If I'd known, I never would have gotten involved with him." "It's not your fault he's an idiot." She smiled at that, the first genuine expression I'd seen from her. "No, but I feel partially responsible. I enabled him, financially and emotionally. I made it easy for him to avoid growing up." "We both made that mistake," I said. "The difference is, you learned from it." "Have you?" "Learned from it, I mean." It was a good question. "I learned that being nice doesn't make people respect you. It just makes them think you're weak." "And now?" "Now they know better." Elise nodded approvingly. "Good. You know, Julian's been trying to contact me, begging for another chance, promising to change, all the usual nonsense." "What did you tell him?" "Nothing. I blocked his number." She leaned forward slightly. "But I thought you might be interested to know that he's been asking about Nina. Apparently, she's not responding to his calls either. Trouble in paradise. More like paradise never existed. Turns out when you strip away the financial security and social status, there's not much left between them, just two selfish people who deserve each other." We talked for another hour, sharing war stories and comparing notes on our respective disasters. Elise was intelligent, funny, and refreshingly honest about her mistakes. Under different circumstances, I might have been interested in getting to know her better. But I wasn't ready for that. I was still enjoying my freedom, the space to be myself without constantly managing someone else's emotions and expectations. As I walked back to my apartment that evening, I felt lighter than I had in years. Nina and Julian were discovering what life was like without their respective safety nets. They were learning that actions have consequences, that treating people badly eventually catches up with you. And I was learning something too, that being alone was infinitely better than being with someone who didn't value you. The best part was, this was just the beginning. Nina and Julian thought they'd hit rock bottom, but they had no idea how much further they could fall. I was looking forward to showing them. 3 weeks after the restaurant incident, Nina's life had become a cautionary tale about the dangers of social media oversharing. Her desperate posts about being betrayed and sabotaged had only made things worse, painting her as unstable and vindictive rather than sympathetic. I was monitoring the situation from my comfortable new apartment when Marcus called with interesting news. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "Julian showed up at the dealership today, trying to trade in his lease for something cheaper. Let me guess. His credit application was declined. Worse, turns out the car was leased under Elise's name. She'd already called to have it repossessed. We had to take his keys right there in the showroom." I could picture Julian's face when he realized he was stranded without transportation. His whole image was built around success and mobility. The guy who could take you on spontaneous adventures. Hard to be spontaneous when you're taking the bus. "There's more," Marcus continued. "He asked if I knew where you lived. Said he wanted to talk man to man about the situation." "What did you tell him?" "I told him you were out of his league, and he should focus on finding a job that doesn't require people to respect him. That evening, I decided to venture out to one of Nina's old haunts, the rooftop bar where she used to hold court with her influencer friends. I was curious to see how the social dynamics had shifted in her absence. The place was buzzing with its usual crowd of wannabe lifestyle gurus and amateur photographers. I recognized several faces from Nina's Instagram posts, people who used to comment heart emojis on her selfies and beg for brand recommendations. I ordered a drink and positioned myself where I could observe without being obvious. It didn't take long to spot Gina and Lexi at their usual corner table, phones out, documenting their evening for social media. "I can't believe she's still staying with you," Lexi was saying to Gina. "It's been 3 weeks." "I know, but what else can I do? She's completely broke. That job was everything to her. She should have thought about that before she decided to cheat on her husband in public." Interesting. The narrative had shifted from Nina being the victim of my cruel revenge to Nina being the architect of her own destruction. Her friends were distancing themselves from her, rewriting history to protect their own reputations. "Did you see Julian's latest post?" Gina asked, showing Lexi her phone. "He's working at a gym in the suburbs now, not even as a trainer. He's cleaning equipment and checking people in." "Serves him right. I never liked him anyway." Another revision of history. I remembered these same women fawning over Julian at parties, praising his adventurous spirit and comparing him favorably to their own boring boyfriends. I was about to leave when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Well, well, if it isn't the mastermind himself. I turned to find Sam, Nina's friend who'd been recording everything at the dinner party. She looked different, less polished, more genuine somehow. "Sam," I said neutrally, "can I buy you a drink? I think we should talk." She led me to a quieter corner of the bar, away from the Instagram performance artists and their ring lights. "I owe you an apology," she said once we'd settled at a small table. "For what?" "For being part of that whole thing. The way we treated you, the things we said. It was cruel and unnecessary." I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or hidden agenda. What's brought on this sudden attack of conscience? Watching Nina implode, mostly, and realizing that we were all complicit in creating the monster she became. Monster seems harsh. Does it? She's been living with Gina for 3 weeks, and she's already trying to steal Gina's boyfriend. She's posting revenge porn threats about you on social media. She's calling your work, trying to get you fired. That last part was news to me. She called my work? Multiple times. Told them you were unstable, that you'd threatened her, that you were a danger to yourself and others. HR had to get involved. I made a mental note to check with my boss in the morning. Nina's desperation was escalating, which meant she was becoming more dangerous. "The thing is," Sam continued, "watching all this unfold made me realize something about myself, about all of us really. We were so caught up in the drama, in the entertainment value of other people's relationships, that we forgot these were real people with real feelings." "Took you long enough to figure that out." "I know. And I know this doesn't fix anything, but I wanted you to know that not everyone thinks you're the villain in this story." She pulled out her phone and showed me a video, Nina, drunk and ranting in Gina's apartment, threatening to destroy me and Julian both. She looked unhinged, desperate, nothing like the polished influencer she'd once been. "She recorded this last night," Sam said. "She was going to post it, but Gina and I talked her out of it. Barely." "Why are you showing me this?" "Because I think you should know what you're dealing with. Nina's not just embarrassed or hurt anymore. She's genuinely angry, and she's not thinking clearly." I watched the video again, noting the wild look in Nina's eyes, the way her hands shook as she gestured. This wasn't just wounded pride anymore. This was someone who'd lost everything and was looking for someone to blame. "She's been asking about your new address," Sam continued. "Trying to get people to help her find you. So far, no one's willing to get involved, but..." But desperate people do desperate things. Exactly. I thanked Sam for the warning and headed home, my mind already working on contingency plans. Nina's public humiliation had been satisfying, but if she was escalating to harassment and stalking, I needed to be prepared. The next morning, I called my boss and explained the situation. Fortunately, my work performance spoke for itself, and HR was more concerned about Nina's behavior than mine. They documented her calls and advised me to file a restraining order if the harassment continued. I also called Elise, who'd become an unexpected ally in this whole mess. She's been calling Julian too, Elise told me. Apparently, she blames him for ruining her life, as if she wasn't an active participant in her own downfall. What's Julian saying? Nothing, as far as I know. He's too busy trying to survive. Did you know he's been evicted from his parents' house? Turns out even family has limits when it comes to enabling destructive behavior. The pieces were falling into place for a final confrontation. Nina and Julian had both hit rock bottom, but instead of learning from their mistakes, they were lashing out at everyone else. They were dangerous now, unpredictable in the way that cornered animals become unpredictable. But I'd been planning for this possibility all along. The beautiful thing about being underestimated is that people never see your real moves coming. It was time to end this once and for all. That evening, I sent a message to both Nina and Julian from an anonymous account. Meet me at Riverside Park tomorrow at 8 p.m. if you want to discuss terms for ending this. I knew they'd come. They were desperate enough to grab at any chance for resolution, even if it meant walking into an obvious trap. What they didn't know was that I'd invited an audience. Riverside Park at sunset was beautiful in the way that only places touched by human misery can be. The golden light filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across the walking paths where joggers and dog walkers went about their evening routines, oblivious to the drama about to unfold. I arrived early and positioned myself at a picnic table near the main pavilion, with clear sightlines in all directions. I'd chosen this location carefully, public enough to ensure safety, but isolated enough for privacy. More importantly, it was the same park where Nina and I had had our first official date 4 years ago, back when she still pretended to find my stability attractive. The irony wasn't lost on me. Nina arrived first, 20 minutes early, and clearly agitated. She'd lost weight over the past month, and not in a healthy way. Her clothes hung loose on her frame, and her usually perfect makeup couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes. She looked around nervously before spotting me at the table. "Quentin," she said, approaching cautiously, "I got your message." "I figured you would. Desperation makes people punctual." She flinched, but sat down across from me. "We need to talk about this situation. It's gotten out of hand." "Has it? I think it's gone exactly as far as it needed to go. You've destroyed my life. I lost my job, my apartment, my friends. Everything I worked for is gone because of your petty revenge." "No," I said calmly. "Everything you worked for is gone because you decided to publicly humiliate your husband while planning to cheat on him. I just made sure there were consequences for your actions." Julian appeared at the edge of the pavilion, looking around warily before approaching our table. He'd clearly seen better days. His designer clothes had been replaced with discount store basics, and his gym-sculpted physique was already starting to soften around the edges. "Nina," he said uncertainly, "what's going on? I got a message about meeting here." "I sent the message," I said, standing up. "I thought it was time the three of us had an honest conversation about how this ends." Julian's face hardened when he saw me. "You snake. Do you have any idea what you've done to us?" "I have a pretty good idea, actually. I've been documenting the whole thing." That was when they noticed the other people in the park. Not just random joggers and dog walkers, but familiar faces. Marcus was there, along with several of my coworkers. Elise sat on a bench near the playground, her phone discreetly recording. Even some of Nina's former friends had shown up, drawn by the promise of drama. What is this? Nina asked, her voice rising. This is your final performance, I said. The last act of the show you've been putting on for the past month. Julian took a step toward me, his hands clenched into fists. You think this is funny? You think destroying people's lives is some kind of game? I think people who destroy their own lives shouldn't blame others for watching it happen. You manipulated everything. You set us up. I gave you exactly what you said you wanted. Nina wanted excitement and passion instead of boring stability. You wanted to reconnect with your ex-girlfriend. I just removed the obstacles that were preventing you from living your authentic lives. Nina was looking around at the growing crowd, realizing that this wasn't a private conversation, but a public spectacle. You're insane, she whispered. Am I? Let's review what actually happened, shall we? I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recording app. Nina, at a party in our home, in front of witnesses, you said that if you had to choose between me and Julian, you'd choose Julian. Is that correct? I was drunk. Is that correct? Yes, but... And Julian, you were planning to meet with Nina for a romantic dinner while engaged to another woman. Is that correct? Julian glared at me but didn't answer. I'll take that as a yes. So we have two adults making conscious choices to betray their respective partners. The only thing I did was make sure those choices had realistic consequences. You ruined our lives, Nina shouted, drawing stares from passers-by. No, I revealed your lives. There's a difference. Elise approached from her bench, her phone still recording. Actually, I think Quentin did us all a favor. Julian, how long were you planning to string me along while you pursued Nina? Elise, please. How long? She repeated. Julian's shoulders sagged. I don't know. I was confused. Confused about what? Whether you wanted to marry me or cheat on me? Because those seem like pretty clear options. Nina turned on Julian with sudden fury. You told me you were going to break up with her. You said you realized you'd made a mistake. I was going to... When? After you'd spent her money on a few more months of playing house? The crowd was growing larger, drawn by the raised voices and obvious drama. Someone had started live streaming the confrontation, and I could see the viewer count climbing rapidly. This is perfect, I said, addressing the audience as much as Nina and Julian. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the couple that was meant to be. Watch as they demonstrate the deep love and mutual respect that justified destroying two other relationships. Nina and Julian turned on each other with the fury of people who'd finally realized they'd been sold a fantasy. The passionate reunion they'd imagined had turned into a nightmare of mutual recrimination and blame. You destroyed my engagement, Julian shouted at Nina. I destroyed your engagement? You're the one who contacted me. You're the one who said you'd made a mistake. I was trying to be nice. I felt sorry for you. The crowd was eating it up, phones out, recording every moment of their public meltdown. This was better than reality TV because it was completely real. Two people who'd thought they were the heroes of their own story, realizing they were actually the villains. Enough! Nina screamed, turning back to me. This is all your fault. You orchestrated this whole thing. I orchestrated nothing. I simply stopped protecting you from the consequences of your own actions. You're sick. You're a psychopath. Maybe. But I'm a psychopath who pays his bills on time and doesn't cheat on his spouse. In the grand scheme of things, I think that makes me the better person. Julian made one last desperate play for sympathy. Look, man, I get that you're hurt, but this has gone too far. We made mistakes, but we don't deserve to have our lives destroyed. Deserve, I repeated thoughtfully. That's an interesting word. Did I deserve to be humiliated in my own home? Did Elise deserve to be betrayed by her fiancé? Did the people who trusted you deserve to be lied to? That's different. No, it's not. It's exactly the same. The only difference is that when you hurt people, you expected them to suffer in silence. When I hurt you back, I made sure everyone could see it. The live stream had gone viral. Comments were pouring in from strangers around the world, most of them supporting my position and mocking Nina and Julian's attempts to play the victim. "You want to know the really beautiful part of all this?" I continued, addressing the camera as much as my former wife. "You did this to yourselves. Every single consequence you've faced has been the direct result of choices you made. I just made sure those choices mattered." Nina was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks as she realized that her public image was being destroyed in real time by thousands of strangers who were enjoying her humiliation. "Please," she whispered, "make it stop." "I can't make it stop," I said gently. "That's not how consequences work. You set this in motion when you decided that your marriage vows were just suggestions. Now you get to live with what you've created." Julian grabbed Nina's arm, trying to pull her away from the cameras. "Come on, let's get out of here." "Don't touch me," she screamed, yanking away from him. "This is your fault too. If you hadn't filled my head with fantasies about what we could have together, I never promised you anything. You promised me everything. You said we were meant to be together." They were completely unraveling now, their public breakdown being broadcast to an audience that was growing by the minute. The comments were brutal, but they were also accurate. Nina and Julian had destroyed their own lives through selfishness and poor judgment. As the sun set over Riverside Park, I watched my ex-wife and her lover tear each other apart in front of a crowd of strangers. It was exactly the ending their story deserved, not romantic or tragic, but pathetic and small. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said to the camera, "I give you true love in the 21st century, shallow, selfish, and ultimately self-destructive." I walked away as Nina and Julian continued their screaming match, leaving them to face the consequences of their choices alone. Behind me, I could hear the crowd laughing and the phones clicking as they documented the final collapse of two people who'd thought they were too special for consequences. The last laugh, as it turned out, really was the best laugh. And for the first time in years, I was the one laughing.